Hello everyone. Welcome everybody. We are beginning this new session of Data Against Feminicide. We are very happy, we're thrilled to meet again, but of course, as usual, we always wonder when this kind of event will no longer be necessary one day. Today, we have a very interesting event, but first, okay, let's see. First things first, this event will have simultaneous interpreting into English and into Portuguese. We will all be speaking Spanish. So for those who need interpretation into Portuguese, you have to select the icon, the globe icon, and then choose the Portuguese channel. And the same applies for English. You have that globe icon there. What we're going to do is, perhaps Alessandra, perhaps later you can include this information in the chat, because some people join in a bit later, so they know that they will have this interpretation available. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to find the right channel to activate the translation, and we go on. Okay. This year, well, the project Data Against Feminicide, and some of you are familiar with it already. We do this with Silvana Fumega, who's there, and Catherine Ignacio with us here too. And this year we joined Claire Brannigan from RIAF, and also Claudia from the Coordinadora 19 de Diciembre, to co-organize a different event this time together. Catherine, Silvana, and myself have been thinking a lot about visibility, how to make feminicide visible as a phenomenon, but also the cases, the real cases of femicide. And Claire wrote to us, contacted us, and asked us to do something together. And the truth is that we're honored. And it's also very moving to be able to present this conversation together. We are joined by relatives of victims of feminicide who have come together, organized to make their struggle visible. This event is called, we decided to name it More Than Numbers, the Voices of Relatives of Victims of Femicide. And today we're going to hear the experiences of women from 3 different organizations: the group from Argentina, Atravesados por Feminicidio; the group from Chile, Agrupación Familiares Víctimas de Feminicidio; and also Coordinadora 19 de Diciembre, also from Chile. Claire Brannigan will be moderating this event. She coordinates the Inter-American Anti-Femicide Network, RIAF in Spanish. So I'm going to welcome her now, and I want to thank everybody for being here, all the groups, and also all the participants for coming here to hear these experiences. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I want to thank all the organizers of Data Against Feminicide. My name is Claire Brannigan. I am the founder of RIAF. It's an Inter-American Anti-Femicide Network. It's composed, there's many activists, academics, survivors of male violence and feminicide. And what we think, what our idea, our goal is to create community and share and create knowledge from our hemisphere. It's a multilingual, interdisciplinary approach. I'm really proud to be here today with all of you, but especially I think it's a very important day, because for a long time I've been wanting to find a space to hear the people who are the most important thing in this struggle, a voice of those people. It's the relatives of victims. They are, affected, the ones who are affected the most. And although we don't have enough time, and we have three groups that will be presenting, and it's really important from Argentina and Chile. Of course, there are many voices still missing the role of relatives, for example, in Mexico and other countries. It's been so significant in the struggle, and I would like to mention that too. When there are still some voices missing, and I hope that we will be able to contribute, to keep having this space to listen, to share those voices. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to welcome Julieta Rivera with us today. She's in Congress today. So important in Chile for the movement to fight against feminicide. So I'm honored, Julieta, to have you here. I welcome you here, and I would like you to share, well, your name, your story, perhaps a few words about the group. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Microphone is not working. We can't hear you. Hello, everybody. It's very important for us as a group. We are relatives of victims of feminicide here in Chile. It's very important for us to be here in this meeting. We were familiar, we already knew some of the women here, and well, naming all the women who are with us would be impossible. We'd probably forget somebody. And yes, as Claire was mentioning, at the moment, we are experiencing something really, really significant, because we are we're following this vote, we've been working together with the women from Ni Una Menos Chile and members of parliament who support this project with our victims. This bill has been approved, some steps, but today we're in Congress, and it's really important because for the first time there's this project from this group, which for us is going to be like historic. And we have the support of our friends from Ni Una Menos Chile. This is a bill for the protection and reparation for victims of feminicide and their relatives, to protect children, which is something so important. And to us, it's important to tell Eva too that before creating this group, because this group began under the wings of the women of Ni Una Menos Chile, and their initiative seeks, well, through other means, to know if there are organizations like this in other countries. And I was a member of Ni Una Menos Chile too, and we realized, we were gladly surprised to learn that there was such a group in Argentina. So we got together, we contacted them, and in our first meeting, we had women from the Red Chilena Contra la Violencia too. That was our first organization, our first coordination. That's where we began working. I would like to read something that is really important to us. At the moment, I'm waiting here because we are about to travel to meet our fellow members of the organization in the station. I asked Claire if I could read something that I think expresses a bit what our struggle is about, and then I would like to go on. All the people who are members of this group, Agrupación Víctimas de Feminicidios, we have been forced to deal with the violent death or disappearance of a member of our family, following a crime committed by a son of a patriarchal society who felt entitled to decide the will and the life of a woman, of a loved one, someone who was important for their family. Our organization begins following the idea of our friends from Ni Una Menos Chile. We got together with the women of the Red Contra la Violencia to carry out this project, this struggle. We consider feminicide not just what has been acknowledged as so under Chilean legislation, but also others who are directly or indirectly consequences of misogynist actions, who have the ultimate goal to damage quality of life and the life and make demands on a woman, as is the case of the feminicide punishment or suicide or feminicide suicide. Our main goal is to strengthen each other together so that we can face this loss that we have experienced and seek justice for our dead and our disappeared. We called family because several times those of us we keep saying that we are fighting to get justice. We are not always direct relatives, but also acquaintances, friends of these women killed or disappeared, as is the case of feminist organizations or other organizations that join us and support our struggle. We believe that this happens because there are those whose terrible pain does not allow them to continue the struggle and seek for justice. So they just try to move on with their lives, trying to fill the void of this absence in their lives. And although some parents, brothers, siblings don't participate, the victims only appear on some occasions. For example, in these events and commemorations, not just for Chile, but the whole world, as is, 25th November, International Day for the Eradication of Violence Against Women in the world. These only appear sometimes, for some specific actions, perhaps in the streets. So the systematic and continuous work that our organization carries out is in the hands of women. Our struggle, our demands are many, or several. We went out in public in 2019, on 25 November, International Day for the Elimination of Women, Violence Against Women. And ever since, we haven't stopped. We have been continuously fighting to get justice for our dead and our disappeared. And we say that the state regularly violates our rights, fundamental rights to access justice. Unfortunately, those of us who have experienced femicide in our family or community and don't have the economic means to hire private lawyers, we run the risk. It's very possible that the crimes that affected us will go unpunished, and no one should say that those who are part of this organization have experienced this terrible experience after years and years, after perhaps being attacked by femicides, and then seeing that in courts, nothing happens, and our cases just fall into oblivion, or we would say hibernation. Everything stops, all procedures are stopped. And there are many cases like this, many femicides that have gone unpunished. And that is what made us experts in finding resources when we don't have them. Collectively or individually, as families or groups of friends, we do all sorts of events, raffles, because as a group of relatives of victims of feminicide, we don't have any resources economically to face, all the actions that we need to do. These are part of our common activities, regular activities, and this is the result of this justice system that is inefficient. The prosecution is inefficient. They don't do the work they were created to do, or just do it with a great indifference that borders neglect. which hurts even more those of us who have already suffered a great damage, very hard to recover from. The state affects us when it does not guarantee access to justice for our dead and our disappeared, when prosecutions are so negligent that there are so many perpetrators of feminicide walking safely around the streets, when those institutions don't lead investigations seeking to protect a woman or a girl, a victim of murder or disappearance. From the courts, in the courts, all these cases have multiplied. There have been disappearances, 15 girls and women, and these cases were met with, impunity. Ever since, these cases have multiplied in our country. We have forgotten the disappeared girls in Copiapó between 2018 and 2020. Catalina Alvarez, 16 years old, among others. They were found recently, and we believe that these girls and women, they don't disappear. Somebody makes them disappear, and they remain missing because of the inefficient investigations run by the prosecutions. And this is terrible, because we can say without a shadow of a doubt that there is something worse than a feminicide. Is a feminicide in which the body has never been found because the perpetrator made it disappear, and so the mothers and the relatives of that person keep living with a constant tension of trying to find the body and suffering to find all the resources, organizing searches that don't even have the support of the police. And the state does not only attack us that way, it also happens by avoiding responsibility, by allowing feminicides who are serving sentence can attack us through social media. They can access those of us, as is happening at the moment in the north, in the case of one of our members of our group, our spokeswoman, Ruth Rojas. The femicide post presented the feminicide as suicide, and there has been no investigation. The case has been closed. There is no justice. At the same time, the perpetrator didn't even face an investigation, and he's walking freely the streets of Santiago. But and then Ruth, as mother of Jimena, now demands justice, and we do that. And we say that asking for justice for our girls can be turned into a crime. Nicole Saavedra is a girl from the 5th section. She was kidnapped, tortured, disappeared for over 5 days, and then murdered. And now, after a long trial, we're not knowing where the perpetrator is, the prosecution, the special forces destroy everything and accuse the family, and also Maria Bamonte, who's also part of our organization. They face trial and have been convicted. And that is proof to us that justice, apart from not giving justice, persecutes us and punishes us. Ximena Cortez faced trial by the murderer of her daughter. He's a member of an institution that protected him when he appeared before the authorities, and guaranteeing impunity, which is similar to what happened in the case of Dorian Caraur. They made a feminicide look as suicide, and after 5 years in which our fellow member fought, she had to appear and present evidence, find experts to restart the investigation. It's been a month now. It's been a long month, and let's hope that at some point we find real justice for the Feminicidio of Dorian Taur. And then finally, what is happening with grandmothers, for example. There's Ruth, who's been accused by the murderer of her daughter for seeking justice for her daughter. She's in charge of the kids, of the fruit of what had once been a marriage, with no psychological attention, with no resources, with no protection. And this is, and even so, they continue fighting, because demanding justice now is a crime. We will continue to fight together alongside feminist organizations, our allies, to hope that this case and all the other cases that are still unpunished, as was the case of Dorian Daoud and all the other girls and women who have disappeared, find justice, in this case after a 5-year struggle. Stories like that of Ruth, that of Jimena, like the death, disappearance of Nancy and her daughter Paola Alvarado, still can't find her daughter, and there is no conviction because there is no crime. And seeing in the state and society should at least try to repair the damage and the negligence of those institutions in charge of justice. We have no doubt that there are new legal instruments necessary to make this work easier, not just to face feminicide violence, but also to offer its victims justice, reparation, and give them an opportunity to rebuild their lives. Currently, we are working with a bill for an act for justice and total reparation for victims of feminicide, so that children can be protected. And this bill, this project, as I said, began with the Ni Una Menos Chile, the groups of relatives of victims of feminicide and the families who were at the time, all these founders. We began to present, and we invited a member of parliament to talk to us, to know us, so we could tell her everything that happens to relatives when justice is denied, the lack of opportunity, these trials, these prosecutions that involve institutions. And so we had these demands from our families, and Member of Parliament Caro Cariola heard us, and that same week we were already talking to her. We invited her to our coordination, to our Ni Una Menos Chile, to our organization, and we had our first meeting. And in less than a month, we were already in conversation with relatives and offering our testimonies, sharing our experiences of our fight, of the struggle that we were carrying out as relatives. And this is how this bill, this act begins. And it's not just a protection for the children, but also reparation, so that perpetrators of feminicide in the institutions, so that they are no longer protected by the institutions, so that courts, so that they can go to court with their lawyers and they can say, I am innocent. But if they are convicted by justice, well, then they should pay with prison and not have institutions protect them. For example, one of the women in our group, her 3 kids were burned alive, the Sandoval family. And while on trial, doing all the paperwork, it took over 2 years after her daughter had been murdered. There were no investigations, and in the middle of the trial with psychiatrists and on leave, she was fired. Now, with this new act, with this new law, no woman or no relative who is seeking justice for feminicide will be fired. So the victims, today we've had so many girls who are missing, disappeared, who were found dead after several days, like Nicole Saavedra, Maria Pavés, Catalina Tiare, and all these girls who are still missing. And the 14 girls, that they said that they were going to some other states to work in prostitution, and it wasn't true. So there will be delays in looking for the girls. But with this new bill, after 24 hours, the state, the institutions have to do their work and go and look for them. there are so many things about this bill, about this project. It's so well prepared, but unfortunately we can't ask for resources because resources don't come from the state, when they prepare the budget for the year, but rather it will be discussed later in Congress, in Parliament, when this bill is voted or passed. Then we will get the indications, and that is when we will go and demand the government to assign resources, to allocate resources for this bill that we believe, as relatives of victims of feminicide, to be historic, because children, we have reparation in education from the moment it happens until they finish, their entire education. That will be free. They will have access to healthcare and also to housing, so that when our relatives are murdered, the perpetrators keep the inheritance. They pay for their defense with their money of our dead. So with this bill, it will be impossible. That will never happen again. These assets will be frozen immediately, and they will be transferred immediately automatically to the children. So the perpetrator of feminicide will not keep the assets of that woman and use that money to defend themselves. What feminicides So that perpetrators of feminicide will never ask to have their kids visit them in jail. The relatives of victims have like all these ultimate decisions. So there are many things that we are asking. There are many demands, but it is not. It's not a project that will. It's not like we are happy. It's just a reparation. There's a lot that remains to be done. Institutions have to do their work to ensure, to guarantee by law for a life free of violence. Just having justice will give us just some peace, some reparation, at least some small portion of the damage that's been done. And that's what this bill does. Just a reparation in a few aspects, because it's not 100%, because justice and reparation are rights that we should have real and effective access to. But unfortunately, these rights are constantly violated by the entire state that is supposed to make sure that childhood is protected and that laws are enforced. Perhaps I've spoken for too long, but I would like to say that when we began working together, we were born as something very, very small. So I can let my fellow speakers present, but there are many families in our group. I said this in a previous conversation, but you know what? For us, it was very important to make our group visible, this group of relatives of victims of feminicide. We want people to know that we exist, that there were relatives, that we are made invisible, because every time there's an organization, larger organizations, if the case is relevant, then we go out, light some candles, demand justice. But in the meantime, while we are lighting up candles and going to court, there's a new case. At the moment, we have 44 feminicide, 3 trans feminicides and 2 suicide feminicides, and the year isn't over yet. So that means that they keep killing us, that they keep violating us, abusing us, and disappearing us. And that is why what we've been doing from the very beginning is this. We've been going all over the country on our own money, with our own resources, from our own savings, and making strategic alliances with feminist organizations and groups to support those families along the way. Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much, Julieta. I just posted a link to your Facebook group for your organization. So those who are with us here today can know more about the work you're doing. I would like to thank you. And I would also like to ask you if you have a link to what you just read, or the text that you just read. It would be great to share that, because it was really moving, and I think that it is something that many people will want to read, to know about, and it's very articulate and clear, the entire context and the demands of, that you're making. And I think that it has a lot in common with the context of Argentina. I imagine that Eva is going to talk about that, the Brisa law, Brisa Act, which was the first reparation law for victims of feminicide in Latin America. We have a lot to talk about, but I would like to now welcome another mother of a victim, survivor of feminicide, Claudia. The floor is yours. I want to thank you for taking the time and all the efforts that you make every day. Hello. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, it's fine. Well, I would like to thank you for having me at this meeting. The truth is that talking about feminicide is talking about brutality, about horror. When you experience femicide, you experience it as a very long night that's eternal in our lives. And suddenly you look at life and you don't know how it is that you're still living. When I experienced that, of being alive, I thought that I had to be alive in a good way, between inverted commas. And in that being alive in a good way is that I have had to continue, almost by a moral mandate, to continue the struggle for visibility of femicide, but of the people who are victims of feminicide. I want to tell you that I'm the mother of Javiera. Javierita was 6 years old the day she was murdered by her father in my presence. I was victim of an attempt feminicide, and she, because of her strength, because of her age and size, she wasn't able to survive her father's attempt at killing her. So she died on 19 December 2005. When this happened, other women in the feminist movement in Chile, at first it was a small, at the time it was a very small movement, but these women gave me the strength, the courage required to, on the same day after the femicide of my daughter Javiera, to begin actions and protest. It was so brutal. All femicides are, but this was so brutal that it led to collective rage, despair, I would say. I can't think of the word. Yes, despair is the word. There were so many reactions from people, and specifically from women and other feminists. Since 2006, a year following the murder, femicide of my daughter, these feminist groups began to commemorate, to have that day as Day Against Feminicide, this 19 December. The actions there were many actions at the time here in Chile. Nobody talked. There was not much talk of feminicide. There was no a law about it that would include it. So this protest was a political protest, but it was not framed or directed under the terminology that we use now. Although we know that this terminology comes to explain a phenomenon, at the same time it explains, it clarifies. And at the time we discussed around the courts during the hearings, during the court hearings, we were discussing if it would be appropriate to incorporate the concept of feminicide, or if it was better to just talk about murder, to punish the perpetrators. And I want to say that this was very early. This was 7 years ago. At the time, our talks around the subject, regarding the subject, we're still quite far away from what we can see now about this terminology, this phenomenon. From a technical and political aspect, there have been important breakthroughs and progress, and we've seen that it has reflected. We hope that it would reflect in more justice and less impunity. I would also like to tell you that the Coordinadora 19 de diciembre, is following this fight from these feminist organizations. Some of the most prominent ones were Memoria Feminista and the Chilean Network Against Violence, among others. Our organization was created in 2018, hand in hand, like following the path of these organizations, and with a very clear goal, which was to have this day declared legally as Day Against Feminicide. And why did we want to do that? Well, it's not because we thought that by having this day by law it would be more relevant. It's just that we wanted to mark the responsibility of a state that is truly responsible, because it does not prevent violence against women, because it doesn't offer timely justice once we suffer it, and which has not done anything to repair, for reparation for victims. We think that if we have an official day, from this supported by the state, the scope will be larger for the commemoration of that, or much larger than what us feminists and feminist groups can do. So few of us and with so scarce resources. What it implies to do an activity for us, or an action for us, organizing actions to reach other people in other parts of the country. And this fortunately happened. We never thought that we would get this bill, this law so quickly, because we thought that as an organization, first we would have to create awareness, to make people more sensitive, with public, so that one day when we had the law, when we had this 19 December declared Day Against Feminicide, it would be already present in people's memory and minds and sensibility. The state has its own times, and maybe somebody thought that this bill could be important, and so it was passed really quickly. And so this was approved during the pandemic. So we weren't able to see the real effect. We called to commemorate this event once it was under law. This year, 19 December, it will be the first one in a context, with a less restricted context, like in the pandemic. So we hope to see more activities and things organized, officially by the state, because that is a very important thing to us too. We believe that the declaration of an official Day Against Feminicide does not only have to do with the commemoration and the memory, which is, of course, is something that is deserved. The victims deserve, they never had that kind of recognition in their condition as victims, and also about their lives. Their lives, in many cases, were in the hands of the states, because many of them, as I said, had already legal measures. They had reported violence against these perpetrators. The state had intervened with restraining orders or some other sorts of measures to protect these women who are at risk. And it was under that context and in that time in which those women were murdered. So it is worth mentioning, repeating, that the state does not take any responsibility for that inefficiency and neglect, and women are murdered even undergoing these processes. So I'm saying that they are women whose lives were taken by the patriarchy in complicity with a patriarchal state who by omission allowed these things to happen. These women and their relatives, they were never given a place in history as victims of patriarchy, as victims of female violence. And what we know, what we always say, what we know of them is the last thing that, the newspapers told us about them, because their stories don't appear on anything regarding human rights. It's just the police news in the newspaper, the worst headlines, the most brutal headlines in the press. These women, in some way or another, have been punished also in court whenever their relatives who outlived them or the victims who survive have been forced to undergo these kind of processes where, in a way, there was always this attempt to find some kind of responsibility of the victim in the occurrence of this feminicide. And that is why, to us, the commemoration is so relevant, because we need this to be discussed. We need this to be observed, the phenomenon of feminicide, which is something that seems so foreign. So when we read about it, we think that it will never happen to us. But unfortunately, we were faced with this in different stages of our lives, in different contexts. A few years ago here in Chile, we were very concerned to see how this phenomenon would affect elderly women too, women over 60 years old, which is also another thing that we need to analyze. When, usually in this case, feminicide and then the suicide of the man. So this is transverse. This affects all ages, all social classes. So what have we done as a group? Our coordination. One of the things, our greatest achievement, I would say, trying to fight towards getting more impact, was this declaration of this day against feminicide by law, official by the state. And another issue that we have decided, or we thought was really urgent, was to gather the stories of the women who were victims of feminicide. Because as I was saying, these are anonymous stories. Recently, families have been vindicating, have been preserving the space in politics. But in the past, this used to be just reduced to the space of the intimate space of the family. And the public, what was made public was made public in a very perverse way that would somehow in some way justify the feminicide. If she had 2 boyfriends, she had a new boyfriend, everything, all that kind of information would like lower the impact of the feminicide. This thing that we say in theory, that this woman was not the perfect victims, but there was something about her. And that's how this feminicide have occurred. With time, this has been changing, but still nowadays it is still very common to find in trials from prosecutors to see them aiming at finding some kind of responsibility in the victims. And that is why we thought it would be very, very important to keep a record, to share the stories of these women victims of feminicide. And so, since we began to this date, we have published 2 books called For Our Dead, A Whole Life of Struggle. There's 2 books. The first one and part of the second one were illustrated by a Mexican, by friends from Mexico, No Estamos Todas, another organization. And also, apart from their beautiful illustrations, we must acknowledge that it's something that was really moving for us to work with them, because it was our same focus, one same gaze at the kind of stories that we were recording, which was not to focus on the brutality of the femicide, but to focus on the story of the life that hadn't been fully lived because of a femicide. Those stories interrupted. So with our texts and with their illustrations, we showed all the projects in their lives of these women who were murdered. I would also like to tell you about the book, because, as I said, this was an act of memory, of necessary, of urgent memory, so as not to forget, so as to remember and draw attention to all the institutions and people who are not doing their job as they should. And also as an exercise for us, as a learning exercise. I would like to tell you that when we finished the first book, it was very early on. We had emerged as an organization in June that year, and by December we were publishing this book. Of course, this is grassroots. It was written by us. We got the interviews. We wrote the book. We edited. So on and so forth. We did the whole thing ourselves. The next day, after we got the book from the printing press, we realized that work had allowed us to create a frame, a reference of theoretical and political of feminicide. It was a result of knowledge that came to our lives. It was almost instinctive. When we began working, when we started learning about the stories of the families, we thought that it would be interesting to have them on record. And then there was another story, and then there was another story. So this book, methodologically speaking, we had many failed attempts because we thought that a formula to write this book had to be like open a call. So we used social media, inviting people to come in a workshop to write the book. This failed. People didn't want to share the stories, and we understand that now. These are not stories that one can easily share in a workshop, and those are not stories that one can share on social media. But when we discarded that possibility because it yielded no results, and we began this word of mouth, calling people, telling them about the project, we ran out of space to add more stories. It worked really, really quickly. And our second book, it was even easier because we had this experience of the first book to tell people the way in which we worked to write the book. So this is a book written in first person. This is written as if the victim of feminicide was telling her own story. And at that time, we thought that it was something really innovative that we were doing to incorporate that way of working. And then we realized that, then we learned that there are many other books written in that format, which is, let me see, well, I wouldn't say format, a form of writing, a collective writing, because the families, the relatives would give us, would share their stories, the experiences, and then we would write them in first person. We worked on them together. One would conduct the interviews, somebody else would transcribe, somebody else would edit, somebody else would proofread. And this is how we created this collective writing, which was a great learning experience. About these books, I said, these are the stories of life that disappear with the death, that their last print, the last evidence of that life is found in the newspapers. And that was the heart of our story, to rewrite these stories, the stories about these lives that were interrupted. I would also like to tell you that these books are extremely brutal, because although it is true, it's not a book that is focused on the feminicide, it does tell the story of the femicide of the woman. But it has its relevance, the relevance of the life makes evident the femicide in exactly the way it is, as a violent blow against a life. Because we must say that feminicide is a kind of crime that does not only affect the right of life, which is perhaps the ultimate right, but before that, it affected physical health, mental health, psychological integrity. It affected their right to safety. It affected their right to intimacy, to privacy, to a life free from violence. When feminicide arrives, it's the last link in the chain of violence, because these women and us who have been victims of feminicides, we know for a fact that it is the last part, but it didn't begin that day. And before that, when it began, we were alone facing this phenomenon, alone with the prejudice, with the punishment, with the stigma. The women who suffer violence suffer, and then institutions, at best, weak or frail, weak from the moment that they stop dealing with stereotypes in schools, things that are presented to us, as women, we're vulnerable, when we are presented where this claim for a life free of violence would be legitimate, without this propaganda, there is nothing to foster prevention in schools or in the media. So institutions appear there as well. And I would like to add that the laws, including the Gabriela law, which could be the most important one regarding violence, they were promoted by the relatives. And this that Julieta just mentioned, this project, has also been promoted by groups of relatives of victims of feminicide and the coordination Ni Una Menos Chile. So the bill, this act that declares 19 December as Day Against Feminicide, was promoted by our organization. So one has to ask, where is the state? Where is the state to coordinate, to promote? Ultimately that does its job, because it's important to point out that the state in Chile has subscribed virtually all international treaties regarding human rights, and in particular, and violence against women, all these conventions like Belén do Pará. And even with all that, they don't do that. We have this bill in Parliament for life free of violence, and it's been there since 2017. And it's a truly weak project. Maybe, in a couple of years, it is passed. Well, we will probably be just as vulnerable, because that bill has many flaws, but the main one is that it doesn't allocate resources. A law without resources is not a law that will respond to the demands that we women have for a life free from violence. I would like to tell you about to finish. Every year, 19 December, we commemorate this day against feminicide. We do that. We call other organizations. She's talking about, I'm sorry, can you please silence your microphones so we can hear Claudia? I was saying, I'm about to finish. I just want to say that every 19 December, we commemorate this day against feminicide. We do it from our organization, this Coordinadora 19 de Diciembre, and in collaboration with other organizations throughout the country, in other parts of the country, where each group does their, our own actions, our own activities in our own territories. And we do a central activity here in Santiago, because this is where we are based, in the capital. This is where we live. And this year, we hope that we will have the collaboration of the government. If they, given this law too, maybe they participate in the commemoration of this date, now that we have this bill. So I would like to invite you to follow us on social media. We're going to have Vivir Quintana with us on this event, because we want to give a voice for this space, so that we can continue with this commemoration, which was promoted initially by the Coordinadora 19 de Diciembre, but we never meant to be like the owners or the leaders of it. We just hope that every organization will take it, each family will take it, and that day 19 is a day of commemoration and, above all, reflection, to see how we can prevent and avoid so that this doesn't happen anymore. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claudia. When you were talking, I have to say that I remember that I'm not a relative. Many of us here are not relatives of victims, we are activists, and sometimes it's easy for us to forget the emotional horror that you experience every day as relatives, surviving, enduring, the pain, the absence. So I just wanted to say that, to acknowledge, to recognize as allies, we are with you. We cannot imagine the pain you have survived, but we just want to say that we're with you and we support you in any way we can. There is a lot to say, so I'm going to welcome Eva Dominguez now, who is joining us from Rosario, Argentina. Eva is one of the founders of Atravesados por Feminicidio. She's a very dear friend. So welcome, Eva. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. For us, relatives, it's always important to be able to share, to create awareness, to explain what happened in our lives and how they changed forever. Having that look, this empathy that we get from many women like you, Claire, in solidarity, and like all the other women who are listening to us now, this is very important for us relatives, because we feel we are in a circle, with love, with care, people who understand the state relatives are in. We recently held a meeting with relatives, 19 November, and we did it with relatives of victims of feminicide and also of disappeared women in democracy. Above all, this is children that disappear, and it seems that we will never be able to find them again. And what we have achieved in these 2 days was to reach the shared experience of pain, of course, with some differences. But, what we agreed is that we don't feel that the state is with us. We feel we are in a complete state of abandonment. It's horrible. And also, we are not trained. We don't have any preparation. Nobody can be prepared for that. Perhaps you could be trained, to learn how to cook. Maybe you can be trained to be a good teacher, but nobody can train you to be a relative, a victim of feminicide. So we find ourselves with all these weaknesses and this failure from the state. This, as the woman from 19 de Diciembre said, this Feminicide Day we use November 25. We commemorate the day for all violences, because we believe that to get to feminicide, there are many previous stages, and also after feminicide, we are what is left later. This abandonment from the institutions, this abandonment, this neglect from the state that does not assist us. We have a law. It used to be called Brisa. The name changed so as not to victimize the girl further, and also there was some amends to the law. What the feminist groups and of course relatives do is that we incorporate, we add like different amendments and modifications, because the first one was passed. It was just a economic reparation, and it required a very difficult process of red tape. It required several there was many requisites, and it was very difficult, and sometimes the children were left with grandparents who don't even get any pension. So we also ask, the state, how is this not a re-victimization? Because we don't have psychological assistance, we don't have economic support, so we don't have anything at all. And so this 25 November, we want to say very clearly that there is a debt, with us. This happens, this runs through our bodies, and we don't have any real assistance. Of course, after so many years, after after training and learning and taking courses with other organizations like Women in Black, Mujeres de Negro, I think that this is a very unequal struggle for us relatives, because politics, the political world, which is the ones that have to promote this, they lack this vision of gender awareness. This year, 25th November, that is our claim, that is our demand. There's over 200 of us, 250 women die every year. And now we have just this very tiny, small national group. We are just very small in numbers, but we need to go out in the streets and we need to be visible so that all the relatives can have that assistance. We're activists from pain. We have grown not to be silent. And we understand that femicide runs through us, affects us, and there are probably many other relatives who lack the resources to be able to learn about it, because it is killing. They kill us and we don't appear. So it's a whole process in our heads to be able to do something, to not be filled with anger, with guilt. We have a very misogynistic, patriarchal, society. So it is very hard to break with these stereotypes in justice system and also in society to join us. So I just want to thank, I totally agree with the women who spoke earlier, the struggle, the fight they lead is just, like ours. We keep rowing and rowing because we have this beautiful law, 26,485, a federal law, but we know that this is not applied in all the provinces. So we discover these things, we learn these things. It's us, the relatives, who learn about this. We learn that in some places there aren't any forensics staff. There is no one to assist a child who is undergoing a crisis, and all these things, we activate them, the relatives, from what happens to us. So I am really grateful for this opportunity to be heard. There are so many coincidences with many women from other countries. Of course, we also have this possibility. Elena Scholdi is helping us with this photo exhibition. She shares photographs of us and our stories. At first, we were in this exhibition called Guerreras, and now that we're growing and we had more relatives join our group, we have another exhibition called Atravesades, and that is where we share, where we tell the stories, our stories, and that is a way of keeping their memory alive and not feel ashamed for what is happening to us. It's a very difficult work emotionally, and also there's the empathy, of having a group, of feeling that one is not alone, of giving some strength and support to other relatives. We had our 5th meeting of relatives held here in Rosario, and for the first time there were children, sons and daughters who participated, and that to us is an immense possibility, because them, from their own experiences, they might be able to say how they feel. Of course, probably know how they feel about what they lived, but to hear them saying how they experience it and how they fight against all this system. So there we are, moving forward. Thank you so much, Claire, for the invitation. Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you for sharing this with us today. There is so much to think about, to reflect on. As I'm someone from the north, from the United States, and I'm increasingly impressed with what you do, with your strength, with the solidarity in your groups and your networks. I want you to know you have the support and the embrace of many people. I would now like to open the space for perhaps comments or questions from the participants. I can imagine I have some questions too, but what you shared was very, very rich, and perhaps we can open now the space for questions or comments. You can also write your comments or questions in the chat window, or you can raise your hand if you want to speak. I can see Sandra, welcome.
Muchas gracias a todas.
Thank you, everyone,
por ese momento
for
tan
sharing.
importante. Y a
It's
mí
very important
me
what you
gustaría
shared.
saber
I
también
would like to
cómo
know
los familiares tienen
how
lidado
it
con la
is
prensa en
the
todo el
relatives,
proceso.
deal with the press,
¿Qué
throughout
piensan
this process?
sobre
What do you
todo el
think
proceso de
about the whole,
visibilidad de la
process
prensa
of
y de la
visibility,
propia
in the
relación con
press
la
and the
familia?
media, and in the relationship with the families, with the relatives?
La cobertura de
How,
los
the
casos de
coverage
feminicidio.
of the
En
cases,
Brasil
feminicide.
hacemos
In
pesquisa
Brazil,
sobre
we have
la cobertura de la prensa, pero es muy
we study, we
importante
analyze the
comprender
coverage,
la
media coverage,
relación
but
de
it's
los
very important for
familiares
us to
con
understand
esta
the relationship,
con este grupo de la
between
sociedad,
the
que son los
relatives and
periodistas,
this
las
group of
periodistas,
society that are
porque para nosotros
journalists.
que trabajamos con
Because for
pesquisa
us,
es importante
working with
también esa
research,
relación. Muchas gracias.
that is
Muchas
a very
gracias mismo.
important
Es un momento
relationship too.
muy
Thank you
precioso
very much.
para
This is
nosotros.
we cherish this moment greatly. Eva, Claudia, would you like to, or Julieta? Well, I'm still here. I haven't left yet. I have one of our member of the organization is here now. We're going to travel together. That is a very important question that she just asked. And why? Because, it's the same as with justice, if you have enough to afford lawyers, 1, 2, 3, up to 5, if you have the means to show the case in the press and the media, if you have access to the media, you can do it. But not all relatives can. We wish, we would like that our relatives wouldn't have to resort to the media or to the press to show the cases, because if we show that our case on TV, the ratings go up, and we should have justice. The institutions should do their work. We shouldn't have to expose our families as we are forced to in our country. One day what we wish is to, for a day to come in which we don't have, which Nancy or Alda or Ruth or Maria, that we don't have to explain. I don't think it happens just here. I'm sure it happens in all the other countries, that we have to show, to expose the horror that we experience. Because first is the feminicide. It could have a national, it would appear on medias all over the nation. But if this feminicide does not have any political value or worth, well, then it's not made public. That's the end of that. So for us, this is a very important fight, a very important struggle. We can't expose our cases in the media. We can't do that because justice should be immediate. And to say and why do relatives go to the media? Although not all relatives have access to them. Why? Because they want justice. They want everyone to know that their daughter was killed. They hope that if it appears on the media, that case might have like this tiny window of hope, and we could say, oh look, there's this possibility. And that, of course, is not even enough. And it doesn't happen because first they describe the case, they have many interventions, but then their family is left behind. Recently, there was something about an event about the Amber case, and some women from this Diciembre and Unamenos and other groups were there, and this was especially to talk about a girl that was murdered by a perpetrator who was free, who had killed somebody else. And then it was feminist organizations that went to the network, and there was this action, and then the case was not presented. So I'm going to leave that question, that very important question for us. There's some profit, that they make, something that they get out of exposing this pain. And all of us who have experienced something like this, we don't want to expose our cases.
Gracias, Julieta.
Claudia, do you want to say something? Thank you, Julieta. Claudia, your microphone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I would like to, I agree with what she said. The truth is that for us, the media are a space that we are forced to reach, to be able to influence the political approach of the story, what the story is about, and we have to give it our all. And by that I mean that sometimes there will be re-victimization. I experience that in person, because every time someone from the media, from the press, wants to talk to me, I do it despite myself, despite this questioning, despite what I think about this interview, because I know that we don't always have access to these media, and that we need to work even in spite of us, of ourselves. And on the other hand, the media in general, faced with the news of feminicide, I have to say that at the moment they show a little bit more sensitivity, but we are still very, very far away from the standard required. I believe feminicide should be dealt with as a human rights issue, not a private, intimate issue. It must move from the private space to the public space, because it's a crime against half of the population. Has to do with my condition of being a woman, not my condition of being Claudia. And unfortunately, the media are still have a lot of work to do in this regard, far behind in this regard. Eva, would you like to add something else? Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much. Yes, we agree with what they say. We found another thing is that we are very critical of the media here, because they keep showing that we appear dead. We don't appear. We are not found dead. We are killed. Somebody kills us. And sometimes we use that tool of the media. For example, when the judges lack gender awareness. So then alongside other measures, our actions that we do in the streets and public, well, yes, if we can get some, friendly media, I would say, with gender awareness when they conduct an interview, because, to be taken out of context, what's the worth in that? And we've learned these things. We learned this when we give an interview and then we read that they published something else. And then 30 minutes after it's published, we ask them to remove it because that is not what we wanted, So it's like learning, about other tools to teach others, about what we are going through. And I agree with Claudia that I always tell all the women in my group that what happens to us is a flaw in human rights, because we are doomed to the perpetuity of never seeing them again. So if we base ourselves, if we stand there, we can see that is a different approach required to support relatives. Thank you very much. That's what needed, a different approach. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra, for the question too. Any other questions? Elena? Well, hello again. Thank you so much, Julieta, Claudia, and Eva, for sharing your experiences with us. It's so very important. And I also want to thank everybody else for listening. I can see that you're all moved and paying attention, focused. As I said earlier, this event is framed in this, data against feminicide, which is my area of work. I carry this record of feminicide in Uruguay. And I wanted to ask you about that. What do you think about the relationship with data, because data sometimes turn the case into a figure, and what you chose, the name you chose for this event, more than numbers, says it all. But also, Claudia mentioned earlier about this record, the book, for instance. The book is another way of producing data. So I would like to know what you think. What do you think about this relationship between data, records, and and data as another way to make visible, make the cases visible, and make the names and the lives of your relatives visible? I would like to share something about data. Our organization, Coordinadora 19 de Diciembre, we began working with the National Organization of Judges. It will be like the union of judges here. And they facilitate information data covering, I think, 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. Our idea was to know what happens when people have these restraining orders or measures of this sort, to protect women who are in danger. And that is relatively easy to get after reporting violence. You go to court and you usually get one of these orders. But there's an organization here that found out that feminicides usually happen after that, because that is when the perpetrator gets scared. He gets scared and he realizes that this woman who used to be under his control is no longer under his control, that she is able to report him, and so he kills her. As I was saying earlier, when we worked on the first book, we checked this information, and yes, indeed, many women who are murdered with restraining orders in force, and that led us to this need to see the data. So we asked the judges for the data. All in all, it's an institution relatively renowned, prestigious. They shared data with us, and it was very hard for us to work with them. We don't have a lot of information to share about that, because there's a key element that was missing in the data, which was sex, gender differentiation. We have a database of all these cases, and we don't know what they are about, because they are all under a law in Chile that covers family relations, but it could be a man, a woman, somebody with a disability, somebody older, somebody younger. It doesn't say anything about the victim or the relationship with the perpetrator. So the data that we want to get, we can't get from that kind of data, which is something that the most prestigious institution here can provide. So I would like to say that it seems that we are not the only ones to be in trouble with data. Recently in Congress, in the context of a law called for a life free of violence, that was again something that merged the lack of data, the missing data about violence against women is in this dark zone, this gray area that prevents us from knowing what happens, but also from creating public policy to deal with those cases. Eva or Julieta, if you want to say something about Elena's question about data. Well, here in Rosario, there are several organizations that have, For example, Women in Black, Mujeres de Negro, Mumala, and another one called Ahora que sí nos ven, now that they see us. But we also have the Ministry of Justice that has its own department, its own office. Of course, the figures are very small numbers, because it's only about the cases that get to trial and that, the process ends. All the others, we appear dead, as the headlines say, or the ones that appear as suicide, because of the dirty, flawed investigations, so they don't get to feminicide. As was the case of Tamara Merlo's murder, that was first ruled as feminicide, but then it was like demoted to simple murder. So we always have to be very alert about these issues. We are always observing, and that gives us the ability to see, how we appear, how we are, when it comes to trials, because sometimes with all this, the intensity, that we experience, and how we there are all these things that happen at the same time. So a woman disappears, as recently happened in Moreno, Susana, and she was dead, and she was really, really close, and no one could find her. We relatives had to go out in the streets and make it public, because otherwise it seemed that she was just, an addict that had, run away, and that was not the case. So it's very hard for us to build, to ask for justice, and for it to activate things. So data for us are vital, crucial. It's not just figures or numbers to us. It's women who have died, and each of them had a story. With Mujeres de Negro, Women in Black, we also do all this, the entire description of what happens, but everything that is made public in the press. Well, if we are able to meet the relatives, we build that real story, how that came to be, what led to that. And of course, it's a very repeated story, right? Well, that happens when the state neglects these women, and these measures, as Claudia was saying, these restraining orders or measures like that, sometimes often end in femicide, because they can do it, because they are able to do it, because it is allowed. They are allowed to kill us because of the entire network, social network, that allows for it. And as long as that exists, we will continue fighting. I believe that these initiatives to see data and figures are very important for us. Are there any other questions? If you want to say something, Julieta. We can't hear you, Julieta. It's very hard to keep statistics of feminicide, because there is no correlation, as you just said, between the state, the minister doesn't know the numbers, the figures, and this network against violence, they keep, they have some records, but this figure is very, well, it's very high, much higher, than that is acknowledged by the state. So with this disparity, it's very difficult for us to make visible our cases. And nowadays, currently, with this law, this like Gabriela law that was changed recently, it was only direct. Feminicide was only when it was the partner. But now with the Gabriela law, this is broader now, because now feminicide is considered, well, with more in more situations. It could be a hate crime if you're walking along the street, and I'm sorry, it's very difficult for me. Now I'm going to try. How do we deal with these records? It's not a statistic of just another number, because just as Claudia was saying, we don't really have the data, we have 44 feminicides. Now, we were searching for data, and sometimes we just find the name, the age, and the when. But there are many cases. There are many feminicides compared to those that appear in the media. There's an exercise, I posted something on my personal Facebook page, and that is relevant, that is shared. But if I post some news about a feminicide, or we share what other organizations post, and you know what? It's no longer shared. The ones who are posting, the ones who are sharing, are the feminist organizations, the organizations who are in one way or another supporting families. So those numbers, that she just mentioned, if we have them, well, we don't have those numbers. It's the entire community, It's not. We don't even have a statistic for the community. We just, we are like we fought so hard to make sure that the murders of girls and women did not appear in a brutal way in the media. And now, if we go out in the streets to protest, people will go and they will look, but they won't join us. So for that situation, we believe that statistics for our relatives, we don't have it. We don't have statistics in the state. We don't have it. There has to be some relative or somebody directly involved, so that we'll listen. I think that here, feminicide is no longer a major piece of news, politically speaking. So it could be even more frivolous. Something more frivolous, something about stars, will be more popular and will be shared more widely than feminicide. And that is where we say that people are taking the statistics. It is rising, but without real clear policies, we will continue suffering. These so many deaths of women and girls killed and disappeared, as Eva said, like that girl that had been missing, and she was later found, but she had been murdered, like all the other girls who were missing in Chile. We don't even know where they are, or we do know where they are disappearing from. So I'm a bit, I'm not sure, what to say. I have doubts about talking about that. If they, we have, with pandemic, no pandemic, feminicides are on the rise, and that is very sad. Recently, I sent some posters, some women who were murdered this year. I sent 27. There was 44 of us. And so activists who don't have relatives said, oh, so many. And I was like, what? That's just 27. There are many, many more, So not even our own population knows how many feminicides we have every year. It's always 50 something, 60 something. And that's how we get the statistics, but it's not a real statistic. Thank you so much, Julieta. Elena just posted some links to your organizations, to your social media. I'm gonna post the link to our Facebook group too. You're more than welcome. And Elena was also saying that this will be recorded on YouTube for one of the organizations and the other events as well. Are there any other questions or comments? There was some comment in the chat about was responsible data in different countries. I think that they have covered the question for their countries. I'm sorry, I didn't get the questions. There was a comment in the chat. Somebody was asking about who in each of your countries who provides the data or who checks the quality of data. I think that you have kind of covered that question. There's also a comment in Portuguese that I won't attempt to read because my Portuguese is really bad, about an important initiative in Brazil, Atlas of Violence, from the National Forum of Public Safety. I would like to thank Claudia, Julieta, and Eva. Thank you so much, not just for joining us today, but for everything you've done, for all the strength and all the effort, day in, day out. As Julieta, she's right now heading to Congress, putting her body on the line to demand the implementation of this very important law. I want to say that from the north, in the United States, we don't have this vision or this name or this language about femicide. So for us, it's very important that the promoting and sharing this information about your struggle, about these laws. You are all an inspiration to us and all over the world for the fighting violence against women. We will have other events this week, but I'm going to invite Elena to talk about them, to talk about the other events. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much. Thank you again for the group Atravesados por Feminicidio, the group Agrupación Familiares Víctimas de Feminicidio, and the group Coordinadora 19 de Diciembre for sharing their experiences, and of course Claire for her excellent work today to keep us on schedule, right on time, and also being able to share. Of course, there are so many things to talk about. I just want to say that Sofia Donner is with us here today. She will do like a graphic interpretation of this conversation that will be available soon on the website, dataagainstfeminicide.net, and also the recording of this event for those of you who perhaps were late, or perhaps if you want to share it with other people who might be interested, will also be made available on our website. As Claire said, very quickly, I'm going to tell you that our next event is this next Wednesday, 23rd, same time, same link. Of course, you're all more than welcome, more than invited to attend. I will send invitations and I hope to see you there soon. And in this event, we're going to be talking about data and artistic practices in the fight against feminicide. We were also thinking about that major word, visibilities in plural. We will have people, members from the group No Estamos Todas. Claudia told us that they collaborated on the book. We'll have two Uruguayan artists, Alejandra Garcia and Marvi Blanco, who worked with data from my record, the records that I keep from Uruguay. the group Colectiva SJF from Mexico. They've done many interventions regarding feminicide, and the writer Alice Driver, who has written a book called More or Less Dead, that also deals with feminicide and representations of feminicide. The facilitator will be Jimena Costa Moreno, Mexican artist. So on Wednesday at the same time, we are going to meet you again. And before we go, we're going to thank the interpreters. They've done an outstanding work these 3 years, but today in particular, so that we could all understand each other. Patricia Antonia, Marisa Carvalho, Mariana Fagundes, thank you very much. There they are. They can't see us. They are on a separate channel, but those of you who can hear them, perhaps you can show some support, clap your hands or something. And that's the end. One last thing. I don't know how to finish this. A hug, an embrace, a round of applause for everybody. I don't know. This affects all of us in different ways, and we hope to see you in our next event. Thank you so much.